Hello and welcome. Thank you for tuning in, where we connect the dots between MarTech and marketing landscape. Stay tuned to MarTech 360 as we explore key strategies for your marketing success.
Hello and welcome to MarTech 360 podcast, where we decode the complexities of marketing technology and go-to-market strategy with industry's top expert. I am Samarth from Data Demand, and if you are building or scaling a B2B product right now, this conversation is going to challenge you how you think about growth. At Data Demand, we have spent a lot of time on one simple question. Are companies growing because of real value creation or just they are moving fast? Sipping features, running campaigns, hitting quarterly targets, and somehow still not compounding. That's the question exactly why today's guest matter. Andrea Saez has spent over a decade at the intersection of product marketing, communication, and growth, helping B2B companies scale with clarity, not just speed. She has worked across ProdPad, AirFocus, and Turtle at different growth stages. She writes, she speaks, and builds community around product, growth, and the customer experience, which is in the focus. And she has co-authored what I think is one of the sharpest framework in B2B SaaS right now, the product momentum gap. A book that challenges conventional product wisdom and introduces a new way of thinking on how and what actually moves and compounds. Andrea, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Okay. Andrea, I want to start with a simple concept that sits at the center of everything that you talk about. Many companies struggle with growth and are not lacking activity. They are shipping, reiterating, and constantly busy. But somewhere between the efforts and the real outcomes, something breaks. And I think you have given that gap a name. You and Dave coined the term product momentum gap. Can you walk us through what this looks like in practice? And what are the signs organizations have fallen into and triggered you to build this framework?
Yeah, it is unfortunately very, very common. And that product momentum gap is that kind of painful delta between the high growth you potentially promise your investors, your board, maybe even yourself and your team, and then the growth that you're actually delivering. And what that looks like in practice is often you're shipping and shipping and shipping all these features, but you're not getting any adoption, right? Other side effects look like support being very busy and overwhelmed. Sales cycles are taking longer and longer and longer. And you're building all this stuff and it's not sticking. And then you think, oh, well, if I build this other feature, maybe that will work. And it's like this self-perpetuating cycle of, oh, the more we build, the more attractive our product will become. But the reality is you're not really building for adoption. You're not really building for your ICP. You're not really building for behaviors, which is something that we touch on. And so then that gap just gets wider and wider and wider.
Right. That makes sense. So, so is the gap usually often visible from inside? Would you say that?
It is obvious, but sometimes that those things come about quite late because they tend to be lagging in a way. So longer sales cycles, support tickets, complaints. And by the time you realize there's a problem, likely those customers are already churning and you can't do a whole lot about it. So what we propose and what we talk about in the product momentum gap is having those behaviors being measured as leading metrics so that you're able to identify those things quite quickly.
Yeah, the gap is often visible from inside, which makes it genuinely dangerous. And that brings me to the sharpest distinction in your work, which is, motion versus momentum. They both imply speed. They both imply, getting work done. They both produce different outcomes. And the most leadership can't tell which is one, that's happening while it's happening. So, the question for you is, what are the warning signs that a company is busy shipping, but actually creating missing value? How do you diagnose motion, versus momentum from inside?
That's a great question. Motion tends to just be moving quickly or shipping a lot of things. And there's unfortunately been for a very long time this idea that moving fast and breaking things is the right thing to do when building products. And It's really not. All you're doing is literally that you're moving fast and you're breaking things, and you keep breaking them and you keep breaking them because you're not really focusing on, first, what the problem is, and second, who it is that you're solving that problem for. And a lot of people that we work with, when you ask them who their ICP is, they might answer, oh, it's enterprise companies. I'm like, well, first of all, that's not an ICP. That's your first problem. The second problem is if you don't understand your ICP, you're not actually solving the right problems for them. So you can't actually create value for a market if you don't even understand who it is that you're creating that value for. So motion tends to just be you build and you build and you build and you build, often with no actual market behind it. Momentum is when you're actually creating that value. And by looking at both leading and lagging indicators, then you can create that momentum and go, hey, yes, this is the right thing to do. And we have the data to back it up, or the early signs to back it up. Or, hey, we're realizing that this is not the right thing to do. We're learning quickly. And then you can pivot and you can create that momentum and keep creating value by understanding those user behaviors and essentially measuring them, right? Are the behaviors that you're trying to create, that you're trying to encourage, those behaviors that you assume are going to deliver value, are they actually delivering value? And you can measure that.
Right. Makes sense. Between the distinction of motion and momentum, I want to stay here for, a couple of more seconds. You rightly said that, we have to build momentum. But one of the biggest challenge which I have experienced, and I've, spoken to many people around it, how do you get the teams to believe in that momentum and get the momentum going? That is one of the major challenge which everybody is facing right across. So if you can just guide more on the motion. Everybody is in motion. Life is motion. Everybody is doing something. They are acting upon. But what I've understood is momentum is that you build something and take it to the next level every day. But how do you get the teams to act in it? From your own understanding.
One very simple word: alignment. Uh, I have worked in so many companies, and the first thing I like to do when I start at a new place is ask everybody I can ask, right? Key stakeholders, C-levels, the first line support team. I just ask, hey, can you tell me what the app does, right? What does the product do in your own words? And I sort of analyze and see how people are describing things. How do they envision the platform working? Do they understand the problem that it solves? Do they understand who they're solving the problem for? And it becomes very clear when those answers are not aligned. And that's the first thing that needs to change. Everybody needs to understand the problem that they're solving, who they're solving it for. And it sounds very basic when I say it that way, but the misalignments that is created when those obvious things are not said out loud or not written down and not reminded constantly is where these deviations tend to happen. And that's why you often sometimes have product is building one thing, the marketing team is then talking about another, and then sales is trying to sell their own version and trying to just close deal with features that the product team has no idea they're meant to be building. But when you have that alignment, that's when everybody is essentially rowing in the same direction towards, that momentum. And that's what's needed, and it's alignment. So what we talk about in the book is doing the VCP, but including everybody. The VCP is not just for the product team or just for the executives. It's for the entire team. So grab your key stakeholders and sales, your entire commercial team, your engineers, your product team, your C-level team, and then put them all in a room for as long as it takes and get them to agree. And make sure that there are no unsaid assumptions. Everything needs to be said and everything needs to be written down and agreed on. And then you can use on page 128, I always like to talk about it. There's this pyramid. And I love using that pyramid because that's what I then use as a visual representation going, okay, if this is what we agreed on, here's our pyramid. We print it out, we put it on Miro and whatever, Notion, whatever it is you're using, print it out, put it on the walls. If people are working remotely, have them print it out and put it on the walls and just have them always, always, always remember those key things, which are, again, who are we solving things for? What problems are they having? Why are these problems important to them? What are the behaviors we're trying to create? And what are the experiences we want to create for them? That right there is the alignment.
Perfect. So because while I was going through a book and, the product VCP is the centerpiece of your book, and you explained it that, where the misalignments happen, but how it is different from a traditional product strategy book. I believe, you spoke about misalignment. Everybody, um, you know, that brings into the center of the entire execution. From where does the ambiguity kills the execution? Is it because when there are so many people involved, there are so many processes around, so many objectives, as a product guy, how should you be able to get everything and their objectives together, because everybody's matrix are different.
Yeah, so the important thing about the VCP is that it doesn't go against a product strategy or a company strategy. You should have both. And you should have the third one, which is the VCP. So usually the strategy will look at your vision, your goals, your what, your why, your who, but they don't often necessarily talk about how you're creating value. And that's what the VCP looks like, right? Is if you have all these other things in place, how do you create that value? How do you track that value over time? So it's a complement to your strategy. It's not something that replaces your strategy in any way.
Right, right. So, and okay. So now moving on to the, clarity. Now, VCP provides the clarity. It gives the platform for everyone. And it becomes even more critical when the stakes go up. Specifically at this stage, I know you focus mostly on, 10 million and above, in the product journey and the scaling. Um, and this is one of the most difficult transitions in any enterprise B2B. Companies that have got up to million or a 10 million often got there on the either founder instincts, or the team was small, or they had a great product, they had a great early product signals, but the playbook genuinely doesn't scale. So something has in the past that has changed, and most of the time the team often don't know until they have already stalled in the growth pattern. So what do you think are the biggest shift companies need to make to move successfully through million, 10 million and above, and what tends to hold them back?
You're right. I have recently learned that lesson, not for myself, but in working with various companies, that the team that gets you to a million or 5 or 10 is not necessarily the same team that gets you to 20, 30, 40, 50. Usually when you're in that initial like startup phase, you can move quickly. Maybe you can afford to break a few things here and there, right? You can react quite quickly. You can deviate your roadmap. Like you can just react to things. And that's in part what makes startups so exciting, is that you can do that, right? You can just build something in a hackathon one day and let's see what happens, right? I think that as you're scaling up, um, you can't really do that anymore. You can't just prototype something over the weekend, slap it onto your GitHub, right? Slap the code in there and be like, hey, let's see what happens. Because the expectation that your customers have of you when you're at 10 million trying to, go up is completely different than the type of customers, the type of expectation that somebody might have of you when you're a smaller company. That's the first thing. The second is self-awareness. Self-awareness in, like I said, the understanding that the team might not be able to remain in that transition. The understanding that when you're in a smaller startup, maybe the CEO, the CPO, the entire team is much, much closer to their users and they're talking to their users every day. But as you're scaling up, you're hiring more and more and more people, and there's more steps between you and the customer, which means that whatever understanding that you had a year or 2 or 5 or 10 ago is actually not even relevant anymore, because you're not talking to your customers every day. The use cases have changed, the target audience probably has evolved, and those critical product decisions that need to be made actually have to be made on evidence, not intuition, because you don't have that intuition anymore. But that takes self-awareness to go, oh, actually, maybe I don't understand the problem as well as I did when we were talking to our customers every single day.
Yep, I agree. And that is where your motion versus momentum comes into play, because when you are in the constant momentum, you learn, the product, the understanding of the product, the use cases. It changes as we try to solve more problems. And how much of this would you say on the market research, when you are building a product, you are working on instinct, when you are working with the customers, and while you are scaling, right, like you rightly mentioned that, there are few aspects they do change. How critical is the, market intelligence in building the real momentum? And in your experience, most of the B2B companies, are they operating with that enough signal, or they are just making product and GTM decisions largely in the dark without any solid understanding of what the momentum is building for them and different teams?
I'm going to answer that in two different ways because both are important. The first is, market intelligence is 100% the most important thing you should be looking at. But the first thing that matters is who is doing that market intelligence, right? When you're a smaller startup and you're the founder, you're probably doing that yourself. But when you're scaling up, you're probably not doing that yourself. So why are you making decisions if you're not doing that research and you're not gathering that market intelligence? You have to learn to delegate, right, as a founder. And you have to learn to trust that your team is getting the right data. And again, that's about alignment and being evidence-led in your decisions. The second part is, to answer your question, how many companies, is not a lot in my experience by what I've seen. I've worked in more than one company where the entire strategy was just, well, let's just do feature parity with our competitors. And everybody was copying each other and nobody was doing well because nobody actually took the time to talk to customers. They were just trying to outdo each other in ideas. Like, oh, well, they put out this feature, we should put it out too. And I come in and just ask a very simple question, which is why? Why are you doing this? Do you actually have any evidence other than Mr. Blue did it, right? So if they did it, if company Blue did it, they must know something we don't know, so we have to do that. That's not how it works. So market intelligence, yes, it is also external and you should keep an eye on what your competitors are doing, but you shouldn't let it dictate you. What you should be using is what your direct customers, your direct market is telling you. So go out there, talk to your leads, talk to your existing customers, and that's where the market intelligence comes from. But if you're not doing it yourself anymore, you can no longer dictate those decisions because you're not handling those conversations yourself.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. Because your customers are your biggest teachers. They tell you, where did the product go wrong, or from the feature point that, why would they adapt, accept, or wouldn't. And the function sits right at the intersection between, uh, talking, understanding, and reflecting back between market intelligence, product design, GTM, execution. Oil boils down to the product marketing. And you have lived this function in a very different stages with different companies. Like, for example, you have worked with, ProdPad, AirFocus, Turtle at a genuinely different growth stages. And, how should the role of a product marketing evolve as the company scales? And where do companies get that wrong? And, what are the top few things that you would want to recommend here?
Definitely, as a company is scaling, product marketing needs to become more strategic. The kind of inside joke for product marketers is we're just deck builders and blog post writers. But there's so much more that we can contribute than, creating a pretty deck. It has to be strategic. And where I see it go wrong a lot is when the product team specifically doesn't bring in the product marketer from the very beginning. One thing that I like to tell teams that I work with is realize that the product launch or the feature launch doesn't begin when the product team and the engineer team have already built the product or the feature. It begins when you made the decision to solve the problem, probably like 6 months ago or however long it was, right? The beginning of the quarter, that's where you should have had your product marketing manager. Sit them down in the room, have them be your shadow, have them understand every decision that you're making and why. Have them understand the behaviors, have them understand everything, because that's what's going to empower them to create the right messaging, be able to communicate value, because they are the translators of value, right? And you can't translate something if you don't understand what you're working out of. I personally have never enjoyed just getting a one-pager going, hey, go market this. What am I supposed to do with that? Like, I don't understand any decision that you've made, why you've made it. I have no feedback, no insight, no nothing. Like, I'm good, but I'm not that good. What am I supposed to do with that, right? And that's what differentiates and makes a really good product marketing team, a really good go-to-market motion is, like we were saying earlier, alignment, having everybody speaking the same language, speaking about behaviors, tracking those, understanding your audience. And all of that happens only when the right people are in the room. And the product marketer does absolutely need to be there. On one point that we were talking about earlier, we were talking about like the importance of market intelligence and your customers, and like that feeds into that, right? You cannot have a great go-to-market motion if you're not understanding your customers. And another thing that tends to happen, which product marketers tend to catch on to really quickly, as you're going through that growth curve of like going from startup to scale up, often the people that came to use your platform are not the same people you may want to have in the future, right? Your ICP may have evolved and changed. And so you need to make those hard decisions and going, okay, either we tell them that narrative and bring them on board to this new era, or we just accept that they're not going to be able to come into this new era. But you have to make that harsh decision, because otherwise you end up with a monster of a platform that is trying to cater to two very different sets of people, sets of problems. And I've seen that happen very often as well. And that affects the go-to-market motion, because who are you targeting? Who are you talking to? Where are they? How do they buy? How do they use? And that, again, that is why your product marketing team needs to have that strategic lens and be in the room with you.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I completely agree on this part, because usually what happens is, customers, they speak a lot of volume. You never know which feature is the primary decision maker for them. And that is where it helps. Like you briefly talked about the GTM strategy, getting the rigor within the GTM strategy. And, the bridge is understanding customer. The bridge is understanding that, one particular feature can take your product to, a lot of customers who are working on the same, like SaaS was going through an enterprise change to a retail chain, where lawyers, where, any small companies, small enterprises, which were neglected by, I would not say neglected, but which were not the right ICPs for the larger CRM companies, they moved towards the smaller side, and that was a big market. And probably some product marketer might have thought about it. Hey, this is, one of the segment which is not touched upon. Let's build a product around that, and so that it's cost effective, it's scalable, and it's, they are able to adapt it. That really speaks volume on the GTM strategy. What do you think is, a GTM strategy truly looks like, and how fundamentally it is different from most companies that do work upon them today?
That's a really big question. I think, again, it really all comes down to alignment. A good go-to-market motion, you need to consider it not as just how do we take something to the customer, but it's really an entire business motion, right? It affects everybody. It affects how you get feedback. It affects how you communicate with your users. It affects where your buyers are. How do you upsell them? There's so much to it. And I see a lot of companies, especially, thinking that their go-to-market motion is just enterprise. I'm like, okay, enterprise is not, just like it's not an ICP, it is not a go-to-market motion. I don't know what that means, but that needs to die. I think there are three go-to-market motions. There's sales-led, which, obviously, as we know, it tends to be a little bit slower and very dependent on salespeople and customer success. There's PLG, which is the complete opposite. It is a little bit more marketing and product-based. And then there's hybrid. And that hybrid is having both it's called PLS, right? Product-led sales. You still have a little bit of that PLG, but you still have CS reps that are taking care of your enterprise customers. And you really just need to be really, really strict about which one you want to have or you're going to have, why, and how it impacts your customer. Because the reality is as you start going up markets, the sales cycles are inherently just going to become longer. So you can't start PLG and then go, oh, no, we have to switch to sales-led because we want to go enterprise. There is a world where you can do both, but you just have to have the right infrastructure. Likewise, if you start sales-led and then go, oh, well, now we want to be PLG, there's actually a lot that needs to happen in order to support that infrastructure. And it's not just the product, it is marketing, sales, customer success. Like your entire commercial team is going to be impacted by this, change in business motion. So again, like I said earlier, it's one word: alignment. That's it. Just align.
Absolutely. I think alignment is something which is coming out to the core of the topic: alignment, motion, momentum. uh, yeah, and this is very interesting, because you have simplified it in such a manner. uh, you know but you tell me, how do you challenge leadership assumption when the market data tells a different story? Because it is the real voice which is coming out. There is a perception which is driven by either instinct or product feature fight that is happening. But how do you challenge that leadership, getting them aligned? Because leadership is usually the ones who are driven on the how well we are able to execute, how well we are able to deliver result. But when it comes to challenging the assumption, rather than what the market is saying, how do you address that as an issue?
With a lot of patience. Carefully and with a lot of patience. The reality is that when you are working with a team, especially with a founding team that was there from the very beginning, they're always going to hold their own bias and their own thoughts of assumptions of what they think is right. And you can try and talk sense into someone, but it's never going to work unless you actually have hard evidence. And I'll tell you a fun little story that this has happened to me, and I tell it a lot because it's really important and it shows what confirmation bias can do to a team. So I joined this team, and one of the first things they said was, okay, well, the next feature that we're going to build is a Salesforce integration. And naturally, my first question was, okay, but why? Can you tell me why? And they're like, oh, because people have been asking it for a really long time. And so I kind of pushed back a little bit, and I said, great, could you get me the feedback so I can sort of understand and start forming a little bit of what that narrative might look like? And they're like, oh, we don't know where that is. And I'm like, oh, okay, first red flag. So I said, okay, would you mind if I just get into Intercom and Zendesk and our emails and perhaps whatever, start looking for all this evidence? And I looked back for a whole year, right, of tickets and emails and whatever. And what I found was that about 80% of the time, it was the team saying, oh, and by the way, the next integration we're going to build is Salesforce. It wasn't people actually asking for it. And so I went back to the CPO and I said, hey, look at what I found. You've got confirmation bias. People are not asking for this thing, at all. It's you just constantly, you, the team, right? The team constantly saying, oh, we're going to build this, we're going to build this, we're going to build this. And people saying, oh, yeah, that's cool. But you don't have any actual evidence. And that's when they're like, oh, okay, how do we get actual evidence? So I thought, okay, why don't we just launch a very quick survey and we ask people if, you could have any integration, what integration could we build for you? And that Salesforce integration wasn't even in the top 10 at all. It wasn't even in the top 10. And so that switched their mind quite quickly. And they're like, oh, okay, that is huge, right? If it's not even in the top 10, we should be focusing on the top 2 or 3. And they did at the time. And that, their growth was insane just by having that one integration that people had been wanting, or one or two integrations. Otherwise, they would have built the wrong thing. And so you have to go into it with evidence, but also patience and slowly challenging, as I did, and go, hey, but why this? And what about that? And how do you know this? And kind of very slowly start to tell that narrative. And as product people, product marketing, product managers, storytelling is a really big part of what we do. And you have to influence people into essentially understanding what it is that you're trying to say and how you're trying to solve that problem. So it does take a lot of patience.
I completely agree. It takes a lot of patience, a lot of fact finding, getting into the details to understand. With so much of noise, around when you are trying to find out information, the next product gap, building that next product momentum or finding it. What is one mindset that as a product marketer, you know that has helped you and that works very well with the B2B leadership team? Patience is what we spoke about, fact finding is what we spoke about, but in all of this, I'm sure there must be times where you would be upset, angry with so many people in and around. How do how do you deal with that one particular mindset?
Two things. The first is reminding them that shipping quickly shouldn't be a measure to success, because you can be shipping very quickly and moving very fast towards a wall. So shipping fast it's not an equal sign, right? It's not like shipping fast equals success. That's not what it means. The second thing I do, and when I start with a new team, when I work with my product managers, I always sit them down and I go, by the way, I'm going to ask you why a lot, but I'm not challenging you. I'm just trying to understand things myself. And I think at first they do get a little bit annoying, like, oh, why is Andrea asking why again? But towards let's say 2-3 months into it, they're asking why themselves, and they're challenging themselves and going, okay, but why am I doing this? And how do we know this? And why would this be important to someone? And I love watching that growth in people of going, okay, I actually do have to challenge myself and my own beliefs, because that's what I do all the time. Whenever I'm writing copy, the first thing I say is, none of this is based on anything. Like, it's me just making assumptions. We have to test. We have to run this through like a winter's test or A/B test or whatever, and constantly refine and learn. It's the same thing when you're building a product. I could put up any page up, and doesn't mean that it's going to be successful, right? I have to constantly be updating it and changing it and learning. And just asking that why, like, why are we making these changes? Why is this important? How would this affect our customer? Again, go back to behaviors. What are we trying to encourage them to do? I am widely known as the queen of why, which I think several people have told me we need to get you a mug that just says but why. But that's kind of what I try to bring to the table, is just slowing everybody down for a minute and going, okay, but what problem are we trying to solve and why are we solving it? And it's two very, very simple questions. But often when you're in that mentality of we have to ship, you don't really stop to ask those questions. So I'll always be the person in the room, be like, hey, just take a minute, let's talk about it, because it also helps me digest. So maybe it's like part a little bit selfish, but also just trying to slow everyone down. There's a saying, right? Slow down to speed up. And that's kind of what I try to do.
Awesome. Amazing. While you are building a product, while you are building your next growth story, you got to figure out and slow down, ask a lot of questions. Why are we doing this? What is in it for the customers? Why are we doing it? How it's going to help the problem that we are trying to solve, or building next feature. And it takes a lot of patience. While working with, the cross-functional team, they are always in motion. A product guy gets them into the momentum with these whys. Is it, that's it, what I've understood from this. And with those whys, with those, questions, it is about getting everybody aligned, let them reflect back on what they are doing, how they want to do it, and then get prepared for the next growth phase. I think, this is what I have understood, and that is what your entire book also talks about. Amazing. All right, Andrea. I think we have gone through the gap, the VCP, the scaling challenge, the alignment, the GTM, the mindset. And there is a lot of depth. Let me just shift the gears. Quick question, quick answers, no overthinking. Just let me know when you are ready. Something that, a question hits you, and the moment whatever comes first to your mind, just let me know.
Okay, let's do it.
All right. A B2B metric that you would happily delete forever.
Out of the top of my mind, I want to say clicks or views. But I think what's really important, I'm going to say this quickly, no one metric is valuable on its own. All of those little data points tell a story. And so if you're just looking at one, it's always going to be pointless. So even clicks, right, a little bit of a vanity metric, but you have to compare it and put it part of a whole story. And that's when it makes sense.
Makes sense. I'm thinking the conversation is going rather from the product, it's going more onto, at a different plane. The fastest way to spot a company that is stuck in the motion mode.
From afar, if they keep changing their positioning. Just look at their website. If they change their position like every other week, they're having problems.
Yeah, I agree. I speak to a lot of people. There was a time we were working with one organization, and the team was really upset. The team said that every 15 days things change. The goals change, the KPIs change every 90 days, and That is what was troubling the team, and that is the fastest way to spot. All right, if a customer value had one true true owner, who is it and why?
The product team. Absolutely. They are the ones that are working directly, hopefully talking to their customers, understanding their problems. So they are better prepared to really understand not just the value, but the perception and value. So that perception and value, that difference is often what the company thinks the value is versus what the customer thinks that value is. And it's the product manager's job to find that X spot, right? And go, okay, well, this is where things cross, and this is how we create that value.
Makes sense. Makes sense. A growth mistake that you are genuinely glad that you made.
I've made so many. A growth mistake that I'm glad I made. Many years ago, I'm not going to age myself, but many, many years ago, I tried to launch a community. And it was like a forum-based community, and it flopped so badly. It was terrible. I was actually really embarrassed. We have maybe one person go into it and ask a question. And at the time, Slack was not what it was. Slack was for little like soccer communities or whatever. Like it wasn't widely used in B2B. And so I had this idea, and I was like, what if we put our product community on Slack to see what happens? And I don't really tell this story, but that community we launched was actually the first ever product community ever. And it did so well that I had companies from all over the world being like, hey, how did you do it? So that was really exciting. So the mistake was we tried this thing that completely flopped, and then we tried something completely different. And I remember at the time asking my CEO, but do you think it'll work? And her answer was, I don't know, try it. Treat it as an experiment, go see what happens. And it was wonderful to see. Now, unfortunately, everybody uses Slack, and I don't think it will work in the same way. But I think going through that mistake of doing what everybody else was doing at the time, which was a forum, and then trying something new, was really exciting and kind of great to see the outcome of that.
It's absolutely incredible. I mean, product marketers are creative. They are courageous people, I would say. They don't fear failures. Not the other teams are not programmed that way, but they are, like I say, with your example of this, it's fortune favors the brave. You go try for yourself, see what happens, and yeah, you land up where you land up. All right, one word for companies completely misread about their customers.
One word. For some reason, the only word that comes to mind is Delulu, which I don't even know if it's a word. It's just, yeah. If you're misreading your company, it's on you. You have a product team, trust your product team, empower your product team. Again, I've seen so many product marketers that are just project managers, and they get told what to build, and they're so unhappy. And this is such a wide problem that they're like, well, I'm just here for the paycheck. They don't care. They don't have any emotional investment. They're not proud of the work that they do. They're not empowered to talk to their customers and figure out how to solve problems or bring people together into a room to solve problems. So any company like that is Delulu, because what you should be doing the opposite, right? You should be empowering your product managers, giving them autonomy, setting the guardrails for them to, go out and do their best work.
I agree. A book you recommend so often that you should be paid commissions, or you should earn commissions from that. One book that you recommend people.
This is not a business book, I am sorry to say. But there's this wonderful book, I've got it right here, and it's called The Rook by Daniel O'Malley. It's a bit of a chunky book, but it is amazing. And I'm just going to read you like the first line, which is, "Dear you, the body you are wearing used to be mine." So I'll leave you with that. It is an excellent book if you're into science fiction.
That is so interesting. It is. At the end of it, life itself is so fascinating. We all, and the first line here you read, it is amazing. I'm going to get my hands on that book, and I'm going to read it for sure. The Rook, absolutely amazing. that's a perfect place to land, especially for me. And Andrea, thank you so much for your time, the clarity, and building the framework that gives team language for something that they have been feeling for a long time. I enjoyed our conversation, from momentum to motion to alignment to, reading, understanding, reflecting back. I think the product itself is, product marketers create or give life to the product itself. And, these are my take from the conversation. And for the listeners who want to read about the product momentum gap and follow Andrea's work, how do they, how can they find you and reach you?
I'm on LinkedIn, so you can just type my name in on LinkedIn and I'll be there.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone, for listening and tuning into Martech 360 for this episode. If this episode have shifted you from what you think about product, what it actually means, like us, leave us a review, share it with someone who loves the GTM, the product mix, and who really needs to hear this conversation. At Data Demand, we help teams understand what the real signals are actually saying and not just what metric looks like on the surface. If you want to build a signal-driven GTM which connects the real value, head to datademand.com. We'll be back with more conversation and people shaping B2B industry, built, solid, scaled. Thank you so much. Thank you, Andrea. It was amazing conversation.
Thank you so much.
We are signing off from this episode of Data Demand, but the journey doesn't end here. Stay tuned to Martech 360 for more insights and strategies that can help you master the Martech landscape.